How do we pronounce your name, sir?
Sergey.
Sergey.
Pandeev, my second name, but Sergey. My name is like Rajiv. You Rajiv, I'm Sergey.
Sergey.
Nikolai, Rohit, Sergey, Rajiv. Yes.
Sergey and Nikolai, right?
Yes.
Nikolai.
Rohit and Rajiv. Yes. Okay. Nice. So you are a director of college or what? Or academy or what?
No, you see, no. I'm one of the trustees of the institute, and every trustee is assigned certain departments, because we have almost 8 to 9 departments: architecture, interior, fine arts, what is called visual arts also. So every director gets a responsibility. Of course, we have very capable people like Rohit and all as HODs, but still, I mean, we are called the directors. So that's how it goes. And I'm an architect by profession.
Okay. Very good. So Rohit, when we start?
Just 2 minutes, Indian Standard Time. You're well aware of it.
Okay, very good. We have time to speak a little bit to know better each other.
Sergey, where are you stationed? Where are you just now?
We are staying Pedder Road. This is
I know the place.
Yes, Russian Cultural Center, Soviet Union.
I have been there. a couple of times.
Yes,
because
please.
I've been there. You have an exhibition hall there, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. So I have come a couple of times there for some exhibitions.
You are welcome, always welcome, because Rohit came to us a few times, and you are welcome, please. Now we are starting to cooperate. It's very good opportunity to us.
Sorry?
You are starting to cooperate with Russia Cultural Center, Moscow, Nikolai, Rohit, you, and we will do in the future.
You all had an office at embassy apartments also, right, on Nepean Sea Road?
Yes, Pedder Road. This is a cultural department of Consulate General.
This is the cultural department. Okay.
I buy sponsor for science, culture, and
yes. So
Rohit, tell to everybody to switch off, to mute microphones, and we will speak. We will unmute. Okay.
Anyway, we'll just start in 1 minute. It's 35 already. Maybe we should start. The students will join. They're not very punctual. You can't help it. Okay, so thank you all for joining. We hope that we'll have a bigger audience joining in soon. This is our first lecture from an architect and professor from Moscow. So a big welcome to Dr. Nikolai Vassiliev, for agreeing to do this. The whole project started very, very casually, and when the Honorable Consul Dr. Sergey Fandiev called me about what we could do during this lockdown to still continue some kind of a cultural exchange. And like most architects and architecture students, I thought it was a great opportunity to have us all discover a little bit more about the Russian avant-garde. I think all of us have been very, very profoundly influenced by whatever we saw as students. And I thought this would be a good starting point, something quite exciting. I mean, all of you will agree that it is one of the most exciting and kind of eventful, short but really, really eventful periods in the history of modern architecture. So the ball's set rolling, and now we have that lecture. So thank you, Dr. Fandiev. Thank you for your support in organizing this. I will also thank Dr. Sofia Karanjia. She's a visiting faculty, and she was also a big help in organizing this. And we hope that this will be the beginning of a collaboration between the Nikolai Institute in Moscow and our academy in Mumbai. I think there's a lot we can do. So I will not take too much time. I'll just ask our guest of honor, Dr. Vandeep, to just say a few words, and we will then move on to Nikolai. Dr. Sati sir, if you also want to say a few words, you're more than welcome. Dr. Vandeep, up to you. Yeah.
Thank you, my dear. Dear and respected Rajiv Sate, Rohit Chenkray, Nikolai Vassiliev, dear and respected students, professors, dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Rohit and Nikolai for organizing this lecture and for this initiative, because, you know, this is the only first event which we will conduct today. But in the future, I hope we'll do more events, very interesting events. You know, my dear students, my dear friends, in Russia, there are many institutions and many universities which have faculties, architectural faculties and vocations. More than 100 institutions there are in Russia. More than 100 colleges there are in Russia. About 10,000 students in Russia who are studying architectural profession. You know, today we will hear Nikolai Vassiliev with his lecture about Russian constructivist in the beginning of 20th centuries. I think it will be very interesting. And really, for me, I'm very glad today. I'm very happy to know Mr. Rajiv Sate, to my dear friend, to see all of you, to know there are many students who want to know about Russian architectural science, about Russian architecture. So I will invite you after lockdown will be finished. I will invite you, all of you, to our Russian Center on Pedder Road. We are very good premises here where we can project some movies, films. And you know, now we have very good relationship with museum, Mumbai Museum Society, with Madame Feroza Godrich. And we will invite you as well for a very interesting event about Afanasy Nikitin, the Russian guy who came 550 years ago to India. He was first Russian who came here in India. It's 30 years before Vasco da Gama came to India, you know. It will be very interesting for you, I hope. So I congratulate all of you. I congratulate all of us with this very good event. And thank you, Rohit, for giving me some few words. I'm very happy to see you. Very happy to know Rajiv Sate, my brother. Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sati sir, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for inviting us to your place at Pedder Road. And I'm sure when we come there, you will invite us to Russia also. And we will meet up at both the places. Welcome again, Sergey and Nikolai. And without wasting much time, I think I'll hand it over to Rohit to take the proceedings further. Looking forward to a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Not much to say. I mean, I think we will leave as much time as possible to Nikolai. So, like I said, all of us have been, I mean, at least personally, I have been extremely impressed by whatever little I know about the constructivist movement, about Tatlin, Leonidov, all these names we have heard. Some sort of superheroes as far as young architects, young architecture students are concerned. And it's a great opportunity for us to kind of know a little bit more. Everybody knows about the Bauhaus. There is also a school in Moscow which was equally important. I think, I don't know how exactly you pronounce it, UTEMAS.
UTEMAS.
Yeah, UTEMAS. And I think it was as important as Bauhaus in terms of kind of laying the foundations of modern architecture. And it would be really nice to get to know more about it. So I will not take much more of time. Nikolai, up to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and looking forward to. So we will have the lecture will be around, I think, an hour to hour 15, 20 minutes. Students and all the participants are invited to put up their questions in the chat, and at the end of the chat, we have members of the Students' Council who are here. They will moderate the session, and they will choose the most interesting questions and put them across. So maybe we can have a session of about 15 to 20 minutes after Nikolai's presentation. So thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Fandiv. Thank you, Sate sir, for joining. Thank you all of you for joining. I hope I still hope we'll have more people joining in. I request all the students to call their colleagues and ask them to please join. And Dr. Nikolai, you have the stage.
Thank you, Rahid. Thank you, Sergey. Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, all colleagues who joined us today. It's a big honor to me to speak about, across the world to you. So I start with sharing my slides, because my big picture on the screen, I think, is not very important thing, but pictures of architecture, drawings, photographs, and so on are much more important. So I start screen sharing here, and I hope it's all visible. Yes, you see it, the slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I represent here our Moscow State University of Civil Engineering. It's a big school, mostly dedicated to civil engineering, and with relatively small architecture chair. Among other chairs and faculties inside our university, but counting architects, we have like a second biggest in Moscow and third biggest in the Russia chair, around 300 students of first year. This year it's kind of 5 groups of architects, 2 groups of restorers, and 3 groups of urban planners. So it's a rather big amount of students. I hope we'll move on without these complications with this pandemic situation. But I understand that many students today, not only in Moscow and Russia, and in Mumbai, are a little bit tired of screen space and lectures via internet. But let's hope it will be easy, and I wish a good health for you and your close ones. So, our next topic I want to discuss, of course, very few words about Russia. Today, center of Moscow looks like this one. We have +5 or +6 degrees of Celsius. Not snow, but rainy, and it's not very good weather. So it's okay for me to sit in the warm space and show the thing from my room, not from outside. But I prefer, of course, to walk around and show pieces personally. But of course, it's not always possible. And even if we meet with you somehow next time or next year in the big lecture room, we cannot travel between cities at the same limited time of the lecture. So today I show you a few pieces of architecture, and some things happened 100 years ago in Moscow, in capital of Russia, but also few things from different towns of Russia. So what you have to say? It's a very short introduction, because it's a really vast topic. So what we have to say first, of course, different areas of life have their own speed of advancement. All different speed of evolution. So it happens around 110 years ago, in 1910s, that engineers and artists became leaders of new movement. And about the artists, I want to say that free people independently. In Germany, Vasily Kandinsky, in Russia, Kazimir Malevich, and in Netherlands, Piet Mondrian invented their own versions of abstract art, of non-figurative painting. It was flat paintings and well known as the start of modernist movement in painting and graphical art. So back in this time, in 1910s, architects think completely different. They are still in the academician system of styles, but in a few years it all will change dramatically due to some social changes, political changes. First World War came, revolutions came to many countries, and so Russian artists make few different groups. They form groups of artists, poets, and later architects with the intention to make new things, to make new language of the art, and to change a life. And we know that the most common, most famous name of the Russian avant-garde culture is, of course, constructivism. And of course, they connected mostly with architecture. But firstly, in the late 10s, like 1916, 1918, the name of constructivism group was dedicated to art of Vladimir Tatlin, artist, and his students. He started to make some, we can say, post-cubist things of assemblages made from different materials, and of course flat paintings too. Late in 1920s, Tatlin will work on the industrial design prototypes of costumes, furniture, and so on. Back in this time, he wanted to express new vision of artists by his great inspiration of new engineering. And we know that engineers back in the late 19th century all over the world, United States, in England, in France, in Germany, and Russia, invented many of applications of advancement of the new technology, steel frame constructions, firstly. And Tatlin proposed a big monument, like a biggest building of in the world. It have to be like a capital, capital building of all the world, 500 meters high, with many of inner space in the cubical, cylindrical, or even triangular spaces, shapes, all suspended in the steel frames. Of course, we know only models and the drawings of this project. They so-called it the Third International Tower. They never even designed carefully how to build it, but it was like a very important artistic gesture, directly inspired by engineers. Of course, we know about these engineers, like maybe the most famous is Eiffel, author of the Eiffel Tower and many things, not only in France, in Paris. In Russia, we know mostly Vladimir Shukhov, Russian engineer and inventor, who built, for example, hyperbolic towers. This is a picture showing battleship of First World War time with these hyperbolic towers as a mast. This is the biggest steel frame hyperbolic tower made by Vladimir Shukhov in Moscow in 1919. It was a few years after Russian Revolution, during the Russian Civil War, very harsh times, and he makes this tower as a radio tower, radio antenna. The first project have to be like 30 meters higher than Eiffel Tower in Paris, 350 meters to be precise. But during Civil War, it was very expensive and almost impossible to collect resources, so they built it only 146 meters, but even in such limited size, this tower lasts as the highest building in Moscow up to 1953. So it has no useful space. It's simply round stages, 6 sections that shows the abstract idea of mathematics, but in real material object in steel frame. And it's used as a radio tower, later as TV tower. Now it's a restoration and not used anymore for some years. Also, around 100 years ago, we started to prepare this 100 years celebration. Some events are postponed this year due to pandemic, but it's still 100 years anniversary of Hutemas. All Russian artists, technical workshops. It's a new institution, very similar to Bauhaus in Germany, and it's a very important institution because it was made with different branches in different cities, but mostly in the St. Petersburg and Moscow, in the base of main institutions of Academy of Arts and Applied Arts Institute. So the first intention was to join together things previously perceived as different worlds, like fine arts and academic way of education for very limited person, and much wider, much broader range of the artisans who study how to draw, how to make technical things, how calculate, how to make applied arts, and so on. So it was some kind of melting pot where all things happen together. And as similar to Bauhaus, the main faculties was dedicated to some new understanding of material, like wooden, steel and metal, or plaster, or architecture, of course, or paper, or graphics, and so on. Many of famous Russian artists and architects teach there in 20s. It was only 10 years of active operation of the institution. Late in 1930s, it was like a setback to more academic institutions, and Hutemas were divided by few pieces as Architecture Institute, Engineering Institute, Applied Arts Institute, and so on. So what was the most important thing there? It was the idea of so-called propedeutics. Propedeutics, from Greek words, means preparation, like some education necessary to have before any specialization in arts of architecture or design or something like that. So it was dedicated to understanding a new language of form, of dynamics, of composition, of colors, and so on. The leader of this
Николай, я извиняюсь, Николай, там просят принять студентов еще.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Okay, please join us. So the leader of Hutemas educational system, it's Nikolai Ladovsky, Russian architect who work in Moscow, and mostly known for some methodical things, not for real construction. He built few very interesting buildings, but not much. And they even invented some very interesting laboratory, call it Black Room, and there's pictures of some devices they invented. It was maybe now perceived a little naive, but back in 1920s, it looked very interesting, progressive. It was like devices to measure some architecture abilities of the person, how he perceived distances as shapes, as areas, not by measuring tools like a triangle or something like a compass or measure tape, but by his own eye and mind. So in the right, for example, it's thing showed how he perceived the measure the perception of different volumes, different angles, different areas, and so on. So they want to start all this process from the scratch, not from the simple things like a small house, later bigger house, later city, but from abstract things like abstract composition. In the same time, artists work on some dynamic forms. It was, for example, Alexander Rodchenko, the famous Russian photographer. He started to work as artist, as student of Vladimir Tatlin, and he and his colleagues, like the Stenberg brothers, work with dynamic sculpture, with all moving parts. It was mostly, destroyed and reconstructed later, maybe 2000s or 1990s or 2000s, like in this exhibition. Some of designers went to industry to make new type of clothing, new type of the textile patterns and so on. Rodchenko became a first Russian modernist photographer and photo reporter. His famous photographs here, and his portraits too. He worked also with architecture. It's very harsh times. First decade, not decade, but maybe first 7 years after Russian Revolution of 1917, so up to 24, 25, it was almost impossible to build anything because it was a First World War, Revolution, and Civil War, so limited resources. And the first building in Moscow we can show as an example of constructivism architecture. It's actually not a constructivist architecture at all. It's a very typical tenement made in 1914, but suffered from some destruction during the construction process. Then after Revolution and Civil War, it was rebuilt later and opened in 25 as office space of big trust, of big trading company. So young artists, including Alexander Rodchenko, make a new decoration of the building, showing a new principle of architecture. Actually, we have a thick brick wall, stone masonry techniques, very traditional ones, but they want to make a new shapes of steel frame or concrete carcass and show this construction. So they paint these stripes like masking the thick wall and showing the new principles. And in the back side, on the right, it shows also some pictures of the productions, like advertising. It was later destroyed, but restored in 1997. So it's still in Moscow there, but of course now it's simply apartments. So, of course, in some cases, only temporary things like kiosks, like exhibition pavilions, appears and emerged before the real, permanent architecture, like this from 1923, or some of fantastical futuristical projects also emerged in 1923, 24, 25, before real construction came, like the famous horizontal skyscrapers of Lazar Lisitsky, like skyscrapers above the old Moscow streets. Even diploma projects of some of Vkhutemas students became futuristic. This may be most known and most futuristic. Even 100 years later, today we cannot understand how it can be built. It's called Flying Cities, diploma project of Georgy Krutikov, one of the younger talented students. And It was idea somehow using some fantastical technologies to build floating cities over the higher levels of Earth's atmosphere. And it was normal to make drawings, to prepare anything needed, and has this deployment of ended. It's funny that later Georgy Kutikov worked mostly as a restorer and activist for preservation of the historical heritage, not a real new architecture. It's his capsule, for example, for this project. So, of course, we know others like Ivan Leonidov, who make mostly visionary projects, super skyscrapers back in late 20s and so on. Or Yakov Chernyakov, a real architect who teach architecture composition. He designed and built many of chemical factories in 1930s, but most known Yakov Chernyakov as a architectural graphic with such compositions of very abstract forms, of course, showing something similar to factories, but without any particular things, even a scale of these buildings. The most known magazine of this time, called it SA in Russia, or CA, if you read it in Latin or English, Contemporary Architecture. It's a magazine issued from 26 to 30, only 5 years, by a group of architects who call themselves constructivists. It's called OSA, Общество современной архитектуры, or Объединение современных архитекторов, like society of modern architects, with leaders as Moisey Ginsburg and Vestin brothers. Will follow by the work a little bit later. Other magazines this time shows very interesting, even covers like this one. It's a Building of Moscow magazine, covers of 1929. And the first building we have to start, it's Narkomkin House. It's maybe most known constructivist building in Moscow, or even in all Russia. It's shows some social concepts, some new engineering examples, some new forms, a new style together, and it's kind of manifest of constructivist movement. And real construction of this epoch, it's only a few years, like maybe from 27 to beginning of the 1930s. This one, it's from 29 to 31. It's made by 3 people. Moisey Ginsburg, leader of Russian constructivists. He also teach and work as theorist and published few books. Now they're reprinted and published in Russian, in English. I talked about it later. And Sergei Prokhorov, engineer, structural engineer, and one of the pioneers of concrete construction in Russia of this time. And Ignacy Milinis, another young architect in this time. Ginsburg studied in France and Italy before First World War and knows the real practice of the Western world. We have such posters published of this house, details and ideas. It has English versions too. I later explain how you can get it if you're interested. So what is it? It's a house, usually named as communal house. It's not very clean term. So talking of topology, it's more correct to call it a transitional type of the building. Transitional between what? Transitional between the apartment, they call it a bourgeois apartment, single family apartments, and communal house. Because in practical Soviet sociology in 1920s, it was common opinion that in the future, like a basic unit of the society will be not a big countryside family, like one village has one second name and all are relatives, like 5 generations living together, and not urban society family of 2 or 3 persons, parents and one kid, but something different, a society, a commune of people who live and work or study together. So Ginsburg says he's not a sociologist. He can't, criticize this concept, but he can support it, preparing the building, which architecture and design decisions have to support this idea, have to stimulate people to make new social connections and to melt or forge this group of neighbors living together. So his customer, Nikolai Milutin, Minister of Finance of this time, ordered a house for People's Commissariat, Narcomat of Finance, and employers of it. It has a three main pieces, like a long residential part, communal part as a glass box, and service part with the garage. It's all designed in very modern way. Not only speaking of construction, of use of concrete, but of social concepts, because it has almost 50 apartments, around 30 small ones, and there are almost 20 of bigger ones. Each, even the smallest one, call it type F, has all the facilities needed to live completely privately, like a small kitchenette, douche, separate bedroom, and so on. But also, it has necessary facilities outside, like a kindergarten, canteen, a mechanical laundry, and even car sharing garage. It has two cars operated by the ministry, so they can use it as car sharing or Uber. It's all described in some books. We have some English books published last years too, so it's not forgotten, fortunately. So it's one of the unique examples when Bauhaus professors directly participate in construction. Actually, not in construction, but in painting. It's all colored with very interesting color schemes by Professor Hinrich Schäfer from the Bauhaus from Germany. Mostly we know Bauhaus students and professors working in Russia in East, in the newly founded industrial cities of Urals and Siberia, but some stuck in Moscow, like Hinrich Schäfer and his students. It's examples of schematic of the coloration of the corridors, of the public space, and the right of the apartments. So there's a condition of the building. 5 years ago, it was dramatically bad, almost ruined, but fortunately, it's today looked completely different. So it's condition maybe 10 years ago. We can see to adjust apartments, one with stairwell leading up and one down. So it's basically a very clever system of one corridor servicing 3 levels. So for a left topmost apartment, bedroom will be over the bell corridor, and for right apartment under the corridor. It's modern situation after restoration. It's a private building now. Almost all flats now is sold out. So it's the down apartment corridor. It's behind this door on the left, and this is the top. So the basic division is very clever. It's made from the basic anthropological calculation of people of this time of 1920s. So it has a 2 meters 25 centimeters height of the bedroom or corridor, or 3 meters and a half for living room here. So if you look, for example, in the section like here, you can see it here. So it's a corridor, 1 and 1. So one apartment will be there, and one will be there. And we have an option for bigger apartment. It will have 2 times wider space, 7 meters, and double height of the living room. So it will be over the corridor, and 2 corridors serve 5 levels. It's a very clever system. Of course, it's worth a big lecture, but next time, not today. So let's move on. It's a modern situation, new coloration restored as a made by original project. It's public space. It's modern situation. So it's look very clean, very simple, and all are about the inner structure. Outside, we can see, of course, it's very clean and simple, but it's also important. You see in the right, it's the eastern facade with the lower level ceilings of the corridor, bedroom, bedroom, corridor, bedroom. And in the left part, it's a western facade. You see double height flats and 1 point half. So it's was a very popular idea at this time. In the same time, at 29, Hans Scharoun in Germany built similar building, but he has a different proportion, 2.3 meters or 2.8 meters. Or in London, Wells Coates, one of the prominent early modernist architects of England, made a very similar building in Hampstead, call it Lone Road Flats or Isaac Cohn, where settled very famous persons like Bauhaus director Walter Gropius or Agatha Christie, famous writer, and so on. And Wells Coates known about Russian examples. And of course, Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier's Unit d'Habitation in France and one in Berlin, in Germany, all built using the same structure, but in bigger scale. We have one dark corridor without the windows, and each flat has a lower part and double height bigger part. And Corbusier was in the constructivist building site in Narkofin building in Moscow and took some blueprints with him. Of course, he was like a hero of the constructivist architects too, even back in 1929, 1930. So Moisey Ginsburg left a pretty big heritage of the text, not only his editorials of the magazine, SR magazine, but also 4 books. It's all now reissued in Russian and English by his grandson, also architect, Alexei Ginsburg. So it can be found in new editions and in English. Written in architecture and style and epoch. It's his earliest books. And most important, it's Жилище, dwelling in Russia, in English. It's kind of 1934 book systematically showing the problems and solutions of dwelling architecture from Stone Age to modern times, with his own examples in real architecture practice. In the right, it's older Russian edition and cover. And the last book, it's a book dedicated on his object, big sanatorium in the mountains. So next example I want to explain, maybe a little bit shorter. It's Textile Institute Commune. It's also Moscow 2931, made by Ivan Nikolaev, younger architect who graduated in 25 in Moscow in the Civil Engineering Institute and made textile factory diploma and also worked with textile industry. He even built a whole textile city in Turkey, in Kayseri, in Anatolia. But also he built public buildings and also he built housing. So he built a communal house, a real communal house. It's a dormitory for 2,000 of students. This is his preliminary drawings. And this is part of the publishing project in magazine of this time. It has a 200 meters long, 7-story high dormitory with very small rooms. It's kind of small cabins, like a cabin in the train, like a 2.3 by 2.7 meters, with only two beds, two stools, and small table. All other activities except sleeping have to be performed in different parts of the buildings. In the middle of this 200 meters long part, it's a sanitary part with the douches, lockers, balconies to make exercises and so on. And the main public part in the east there, it's a library, canteen, things we can call today like a co-working and so on. It's were restored a few years ago to serve also as a student hostel for one of the Moscow universities, not textile, but still university, but unfortunately with change of almost everything inside, but shape outside is pretty authentic today. In the left, it's part of the dormitory. In the middle part of the picture, it's the balconies of the sanitary part. In the triangular shape, it's a ramp. And the right, it's a public part with so-called co-working. It's a backside with the kitchen and the small balconies of the kindergarten. It's a roof view. And maybe it's one of the first, or really first, non-industrial civil building using shades. Shades roof. And of course, Nikolai took all these ideas from the textile factories he also built. It's part of the public parts like canteen space and this co-working. I shot it a few years ago before actually students settled in today. It's a ramp. The third most important examples, it's a Melnikov house and studio. Konstantin Melnikov, also one of the most famous Russian architects of the 20th century, he never be a member of constructivist group. And of course, we can now say the range of the theoretical and creative concepts were much more interesting and deep and broad than only constructivists. So Konstantin Melnikov, he has concept of his own, and he built only few types of buildings, and one of the very unique, it's his own house. It's a private house built in the very center of Moscow, and it's made from brick as two cylinders. It was kind of proof of concept of construction and other things, but never used after these unique examples. This is his portrait of this time, and how it's built. It's made very, using very traditional materials, brick and wood, but covered by plaster, and it has a hyperbolic shape of hyperbolic tower. Each hexagonal holes and windows, it's not necessary space, not used in structure. So later he covers some of these holes with debris, making like a zero waste construction, or making their windows. Later he made a few designs how to use this space as a workers' club for 5 cylinders or communal house, but never forced the designs to be implemented. It's modern condition from backside, from the historical plot in the center of the city. You can see a few rows of the hexagonal windows, 3 topmost levels. It's one big studio room, and in the middle it's a bedroom, and the downstairs it's windows of the smaller rooms for kids. It's entrance, it's interior now. It's one of the 2 bigger rooms. Let's call it guest room or second studio. This is the main studio with 40 of such hexagonal windows. And it's study made in 20s, so let's beginning of 30s, of this bedroom. Unfortunately, this thing it's almost lost. What's important in this picture? It's one bedroom with three parts of this, like a sector of round room, and there's no any sharp angles. All was covered by plaster to have smooth surface between the ceiling, floor, and walls. Even the beds, it's not a regular furniture from metal or wood, but made by plaster like a podiums. Unfortunately, after Second World War, all this bedroom floor level are destroyed and lost, but yellow, gold yellow color of the walls is still preserved. Here, another Melnikov's example, it's very important. Also, it's Rusakov Club. Workers' Club, it's new typology. Of course, Russian avant-garde architecture typology findings and concerns worth another lecture or two, but to be very short, what is Workers' Club? Workers' Club, it's a new multi-purpose building. Of course, it was not invented in 1920s. It appears later, emerges in the needs of social policy and social works, educational works amongst the workers in the newly founded cities or newly growing older cities during industrialization. Before Russian Revolution, it's called People's House or Volkshaus in Germany, and in Soviet Russia, it's called as say Workers' Club. It's a multi-purpose culture center with usually many spaces used for movie theater, real theater, libraries, smaller activities, and so on. And it has to work all day long. In the morning for housewives, in the middle day for children after the school, in the evening for workers after they work, and so on. And many of the avant-garde architects design and build such facilities, and Melnikov most known for 6 clubs. Rusakov Club is his best. It's modern condition. Now it's converted to theater, regular dramatic theaters, not a real culture center. It's a backside made by red brick. Unfortunately, restorers of modern times to make there some very ugly ventilation system, but general shape it's still there. It's a picture after the construction and the structure. It has 2 levels of tribunes, 3 tribunes with a sloped floor, and 1 level with a flat floor. This flat floor can be used without chairs to make any activities like dancing and so on. So it can be transformed. Moreover, Melnikov designed but never built a more complicated transformation system. It's modern interior, and if you look, for example, here, we can see these strange concrete shapes like an ear or like a half circles. And this is the only remaining parts of designed but never implemented transformation of this workers' club, because it was intended to work as a rail to big shutters, open it and closing, and separating all 3 top-level tribunes from the main space of the hall. So it can be converted to 5 separate, 2 downstairs and 3 upstairs classrooms to have 5 different lectures or repetitions, rehearsals, something like that, or to 1 big space. So it was a kind of capacity, range from 350 seats to almost 1,300. It's modern situation. The seater made his steel frame seats, but it can be removed. So what you have to see about things happens out of Moscow. Of course, not all, but Russia is a vast country, and during avant-garde architecture rise in 1920s. Most things happened in Moscow because it's capital, but not only in Moscow. I show you one piece of each city. It's not only in Russia. So today's border of Russia, it's like this. And some bigger countries like Ukraine or Kazakhstan or Belarus, all has very prominent examples of architecture made by local architects or architects from Moscow, older capital St. Petersburg, or Leningrad these times. But now it's foreign countries, and they treat it differently. In some cases, very good. In some cases, not. So what we have there? We have firstly, for example, Kharkov. Kharkov is the city of Ukraine, country southwest from Russian borders, and up to 1934, Ukraine capital was in the city of Kharkov. It was a huge industrial city, and the biggest constructivist building ever built in Soviet Union and Russia was built not in Moscow, but in Kharkov. It's called Gosprom, like a state industry. It's kind of super, structure of like a real skyscrapers up to 11 floors high, hosting inside all necessary state administration apparatus of the few ministries of the republic and so on. It's made by Sergei Serafimov, Russian architect of older generation, and his younger colleagues, and engineer Pavel Rotart, who later worked as a head engineer of the Moscow metro construction, Moscow subway. It's photographs taken by German Luftwaffe planes during Second World War, showing center of the city, and in the left this round square and the building around this spot. It's all part of this Gosprom complex, like this one. It's a look of 1942 during the war, so you can see some damaged buildings. Later, Germans wanted to completely demolish it when they flee Russia in the end of the war, but fortunately they failed this plan, so the building is preserved. It was constructed using concrete, using a very big amount of industrialization techniques, including self-leveling cranes and many other stuff. And from 25 to 28, almost 4 years to the construction, they invent many of the building technologies never known before in Russia. It's how it looks these days. Unfortunately, a few years ago, they changed most of the window frames to plastic ones. It's part of interiors. Ukrainian colleagues published some books and guidebooks on Kharkov constructivist architecture, but not well known. And I have, for example, knowledge about this book published a few years ago, but didn't have my hands on it yet. Ivanovo, it's a textile industry capital of Russia, now relatively small and poor regional city, but back in 1920s and 30s, it was one of the biggest fast-growing cities of the country. And Ivan Fomin, old generation architect, made there one of the wonderful buildings. It's a complex of Polytechnical Institute. You can see a usual landscape where new architecture emerged. It's wooden, 1 or 2 story buildings. So Polytechnical Institute in Ivanovo, made by Ivan Fomin's different style. It's not real, really ultra modernist. It's kind of hybrid of new and old. And Ivan Fomin intended to modernize classical architecture, to make it much more practical and preserve this feeling of the monumental architecture of bigger shapes on the like this one of the simplified columns of symmetrical details and so on. We have only Russian books on Ivanova, but maybe somehow colleagues will make English one too. In Leningrad, a bigger city, second capital of Russia, or first capital for 200 years before revolution, we have plenty of this architecture too, their own architecture school, of course, and little different. And of course, people who travel to St. Petersburg didn't care much about modern architecture because they have palaces, parks, museums, all of historicals, but not only Soviet. But it's very important. I show the Leningrad City Council apartment building made by Evgeny Levinson and Igor Fomin. It's a pretty bourgeois apartment building with big apartments, even with second level of the topmost apartments, with the social services integrated in the first floor. It stands on the smaller river and look like this one. Our friends and colleagues published some books on Leningrad constructivism. Boris Kirikov and Margarita Striglitz mostly known as specialists, and they have some English text too, and English versions of the book too. In the Sverdlovsk, now it's Yekaterinburg, it's capital of Urals, the bigger industrial part of the Russia, in the middle of the country. We have also feeling like it's capital of the constructivism, not in Moscow, not in Leningrad, but Yekaterinburg. And one of the most interesting things, it's a Dynamo sports facility or house of physical culture. It's stadium and park and such building in the bank of the city pond. It's a drawing from the book made by my friend and colleague. And modern view. Yeah. You can see very expressive shapes of the long buildings with observation point on the top to see tall surface tribune to some water sports. And of course, here you can see some kind of technical allusions like steamship design ideas in this architecture. We have some of guidebooks on architecture of Yekaterinburg of this time in Russian and English too, made by Tatlin publishers and a few others. And local people fortunately preserve this heritage and perceive it as historical heritage, because the city is relatively young and not much is preserved here before 1920s. In the Volga River, in the biggest river of Russia, in many cities we have interesting things. For example, city of Samara, we have the Privolsky Military District Staff building by a local architect. It's also looked very dynamic. In the also one of the monuments together, it's worked as it's big ensemble. Unfortunately, it still belongs to military ministry, Minister of Defense, so not many details about conditions inside we know. We also have some architecture maps and guidebooks in Samara. In the Novosibirsk, farther east of our today's examples, we know also dozens of buildings of 1920s and 30s. Ivan Nevzgodin, my colleague who live and work now in Delft in the Netherlands, published in English about this architecture too. And I want to show one of the buildings. It's apartment buildings. One was a state-owned companies back in late 20s, beginning of 30s, made by Boris Gordeev and Sergei Turgenev, prominent architects of Siberia of this time, and engineer Nikolai Nikitin, who later in 40s and 50s built a real big skyscrapers of Moscow. He started his career in Siberia. This is the building. It has a very unusual for Russian Siberian climate structure with apartments, not with the corridor, not with the stairwell sections, but with the open corridor, open gallery. It was a rather risky decision because Novosibirsk it's known for its relatively winter and harsh climate, not the maybe coldest point in Russia, but it's relatively cold. It's still there in the city, looks like this one. Later, they covered all the corridors by glazing, of course, to maintain the warm inside. And Ivan Nezgodin made few papers and books on architecture of Novosibirsk. We have also English versions of one of it, at least. In Nizhny Novgorod, also one of the oldest Russian cities in the Volga River, we have historical things like a Kremlin, like a palaces, churches, anything, but also huge industrial heritage and also public and residential building of constructivist era. Vladimir Medvedev, local architect, made a wonderful example of communal house, real communal house, called it Culture Revolution. It stands in the very center of the building, over the hills, inside the historical block. Look like this one. It lacks any restoration for decades, unfortunately, but people still live there. A friend of mine made a book on it 2 years ago with some interviews and a story about the life here. It has few blocks connected together with like a footbridges over second to fifth floor. But you see many of materials and details are still the authentic ones. In south of Russia, we have also maybe bigger cities, except of course Moscow, because it's warmer part of the country. And in Rostov, we have such example made by two architects, Shuko and Gelfreich. It's one of the bigger cities made in the world in 1930s. Maxim Gorky dramatic city in Rostov-on-Don. It's complicated building with the two halls main of such shape, smaller second one, and it's historical pictures. Unfortunately, after Second World War, many things were changed to demolitions and during the war. So interiors now significantly different, but shape outside is still the same. Let's look at this one. It has some monumental art and of course like these bas reliefs over the entrance. And of course, these late constructivist examples we can count as also kind of transitional architecture towards Art Deco architecture. I think Art Deco architecture is rather known to India too. My friends work on the architecture of south of Russia. We have books of my friend Artur Tokarev. It's a Russian version, but they prepare English. They publish it, I think, next December or January. I didn't have a cover page picture yet, but it will be there. And last building I want to show you, it's a Narkomtashprom Mountain Resort. It's a late constructivist complex made by leaders of constructivism as Moisey Gilburg, as a leader of the constructivist movement, and Ivan Leonidov, one of the most brilliant graphical artists and visionaries, also practical architects. So it's a pretty huge group who built it. The main part was finished in 37 and one last part in 46, 51 after the war in different style, of course. It's the city of Kislovodsk. It's mountain resort in Caucasus, pretty small town with many of the villas and the resorts, hospitals, and so on. And it's the first big sanatorium built over the mountain, not in the valley. In the beautiful landscape, it's pictures of construction. You can see it has one big block of some medical treatments, like swimming pools, mineral waters, anything, and two big dormitory blocks like this one. And special part, we dedicated a book to this part. It's park stairway, stairs over the hill slope. It's modern drawings made by my sister, architect, because original are lost or never exist. It's one of the biggest mysteries of Russian avant-garde constructivist architecture, how they build these things without any drawings preserved. Anyway, it's look like this one these days. Unfortunately, it's also needed restoration, and some works of restoration started this year, but slowed down due to pandemic. I was before restoration, so I don't know how exactly they will treat many things. Anyway, inside it looks gorgeous and still operable like a resort. And finally, this is the stairwell. It has a few levels, and the main part is kind of theatrical part of ancient Greece theaters, but only few from steps. And next one is inverted part, like this one. Post-war block itself is very interesting, but of course made a little different style. So a few weeks ago, we published a book about the story of sanatorium construction and especially the stairs. Unfortunately, it's only in Russian now, but maybe some English paper will come later. What to read about the Russian avant-garde? Of course, the pioneer of the research of Russian avant-garde architecture and design and urban planning, it's Selim Khan Magomedov. Selim Khan Magomedov published dozens of books, and only few are translated. I think this is one of the first made by Rizzoli in Italy and New York in the 80s. I think you can find it somehow, or some excerpts from it. It's called Pioneers of Soviet Architecture. In modern things, we can, for example, rely on Richard Anderson monograph, Russia Modern Architectures in History, dedicated not only to constructivism, but all architecture from the late 19th century. And today, we have some rising interest to Russian architecture this time. The huge wave was in 80s and the beginning of 90s. And now it's a new. For example, Elena Ovsyannikova, professor of the Moscow Architecture Institute, and me made a book on one of the first avant-garde architects of Russia, Boris Velikovsky. And next issues, like bigger books, will follow. But during pandemic, we have to slow down a little bit in publishing process. It's all will be dedicated to one of the persons. So it's yet to come. Dom Publishers, big Berlin-based architecture publishing houses, made books on Russian and Soviet architecture heritage, mostly on modernist, post-war modernist architecture, but also covering somehow and 1920s. So they make very interesting things on monumental art, on typology, on even architecture of spaceship of 60s. So it's very interesting. And please take a look for website. My book on monumental art in architecture also will follow there. And my friends will publish on south of Russia constructivism architecture very soon. In Yekaterinburg, in Russia, we have architecture publishers called it Tatlin publishers, and we made with them such posters dedicated to known projects of each, like a stars of architecture of avant-garde. It has English versions too, so you can order it. It's like a square meter poster with the article and the examples of the known designs of Melnikov, Shukhov, Leonidov, Listin Bazas, and so on. Please check tatlin.ru. And because we are, distant, and it's not easy to order a book or find English, we have wonderful site called it theconstructivistproject.com, made by my dear friend and colleague Natalia Melnikova. It's a website dedicated to constructivism heritage all over the Russia, including maps, some news, and so on. So it's here. If you have more particular questions on the problems, persons, or something like that, please feel free to ask. Maybe not even today, but later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikolai. Very, very dense and fast overview. The wonderful drawings, wonderful to see many of the projects which we didn't know. Some of the projects we did know about, but there are so many which we didn't know about. I think our knowledge is pretty much restricted to Leonidov, Tatlin, Melnikov, some of the major names, and so many other names which we didn't know about. Actually, one of the questions that always kind of intrigues us about this whole heritage, that what made it become kind of not favored? It is very short-lived. I mean, most of these projects were built in about 10, 15 years, after which there was this huge resurgence of kind of neoclassical work. What made it kind of fall out of grace from?
Oh yes, it's interesting story. To make it short, yes, it's a very small amount of time. Real practice, it's from 27 to around 32, 34. And back in these times, it's always, very speed life, very speedy life. All things happens really fast, and all social ideological concepts and policies also changes very fast. And in the middle of the 1930s, all Western world, turned to be and to find, more monumental art, monumental architecture, not only in the so-called totalitarian countries like Italy with Mussolini regime and so on, but also in democratic France, even in United States. And I think it's a whole world process how to this very clean, very strict, very demanding architecture became more, more decorated, more monumental, and many of the architects of this constructivist generation became very good architects in new style too. So now we can perceive it as a new stage. At second stage, it's not a kind of only reformation. Only later, like close to 1940s, it's changed from this monumental, we call it now like a Soviet version of Art Deco architecture, to more neoclassical things. And of course, after Second World War, it became more triumphant, like empire style. So it's has a few, reasons. For example, in 1930s, many of the resources are spent to the industry, to industrialization of to build new factories, new cities. So these precious materials like concrete steel frames, are very rare, expensive. They have to spend it to the new factories and expanding of the industrial capacity of the country. So architects have to work with steel, brick, and all like it's old traditional techniques. So these big windows, ribbon windows, thin carcass of this concrete structure became almost impossible to implement.
Rohit, first of all, tell me, I would like to a few words. You mentioned about this, but I would like especially thank Dr. Sofia Karangia for for helping us to organize this lecture, because without her help we couldn't find out Nikolai Vassiliev. I couldn't find you. So thanks to Sofia Karangia, she's very nice lady. She's a member of Mumbai Museum Society, and she's a professor as well. She's teaching in your college and other colleges of Mumbai. And we Russian Center of Science and Culture is very proud about Sofia Karangia. Thanks to her. And it was very interesting, really. You know, only 100 years ago. It was 100 years ago, not very far, but very interesting. Other ideas, other lines, everything other. Really very interesting. I think students were happy as well to see, to know this.
Any more questions? Anybody have any questions?
Don't hesitate. Ask question. Give them micro.
In fact, more than a question, I have an observation, if I may.
Yes.
Please.
What was most interesting about your presentation is that, I mean, it's not totally true, but we almost knew about Russian architecture more as the Baroque architecture, the bourgeois architecture, and your whole presentation of showcasing the Avantgared. I mean, it was fantastic. I never knew there were such pretty and beautiful buildings in Russia. And I think some of the renovation projects which you showed were so passionately done. I mean, it was really enchanting to see those buildings, dilapidated buildings and so beautifully done. And what beautiful architecture between 1920 and 40. What I'm curious to know is what happened after the Second World War. I mean, maybe we could one day have a presentation of yours showcasing works after the Second World War, because this was essentially between the First and the Second World War. So where did your architecture go after Second World War? I'm very curious to know that.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. Yes, it's a very interesting topic. Actually speaking, my main scientific interest now is post-war reconstruction. So I can describe it, the situation after the 1945 as rather special, because in most of the world after the Second World War, it was a kind of kingdom of modernist architecture, implementation of functionalist planning, of prefabrication of everything, because most of the world lay in ruins, not only in Europe, of course. But in Russia, all these international modernist style are like postponed by 10 years, and from 45 to 55, 56, it was different. It was a very triumphant, very ornate neoclassical architecture, all made by Russian architects with old Russian academy of art school, with the roots in pre-revolution aristocratic architecture, but in new typology, like a public buildings, like a mass housing, but made as mentioned with the columns and so on. It's looked in some landscapes, in some cities very silly, in some landscapes it's look completely brilliant, of course, because like in polar ring, it's very strange and to build something with the Doric columns, but in the south of country, in the mountains, and many of the cities were damaged completely. It was very disastrous. In 1941, USSR, Soviet Union, has 3,000 settlements in the state of the city or town. 1,700, more than half, were damaged or destroyed. So many of the cities have to be rebuilt from the scratch. And they rebuilt it, not counting as a cost, as a big, new, beautiful ensembles. In some cases, it's not finished because it was too big, too vast, too expensive. In some cases, it was finished, including capitals of the republics, like Kiev, capital of Ukraine, Minsk, capital of Belarus, or others, like Sevastopol, one of the naval bases on the Black Sea. So it's very interesting that under these covers, under this classical architecture, they want to still solve the same problems, give people housing, make orientation of the city possible, make public spaces, make culture centers, and so on. And many of the architects who work after the war were from constructivist generation. But if they already know all these basic principles of knowing your constructions, knowing your limitation of materials, knowing your functional method of the planning, the different shapes of outside, like decoration, it was second question. So it was a huge challenge for professionals, but also huge time of very fast growing. Receiving a diploma after the war in 46, for example, give you ability to be a head architect of the city in 4 years because the lack of professionals and enormous amount of work available for architects. And later in 10 years, after 56, after Stalin's death, it was another reformation, we can say returning a style to more international way of international modernism, way like Corbusier's or Oscar Niemeyer's, all others, And of course, the Russian architects of this generation of 50s and 60s were huge fans of Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer, Alvar Aalto, like all over the world. And in this time, Russia also, export architecture to different countries, to socialistic world, even to newly independent countries like India, of course. There was some attempts to export Russian architecture before Second World War, like in Turkey, but it was very few attempts. After the war, of course, it changed. So now it looks like a, completely new position of architect. Architect from first in the country, later in almost half of the world, receive a new role, a new responsibility inside the society, not only as a service person who make drawing or build for some capitalist customers like bourgeois persons, private clients, but to become responsible for life of people, to build a new city, so.
So there's a question from Hemant about were there any climate considerations?
Yes, it's very, very good question. Climate situation, of course, matters very, very much. I want to quickly shift our screen to one of the buildings we mentioned today, simply to show some example about climate. For example, this building, as I say, it's the gallery building. It has open galleries in 1932 when they built it, with entrance to the apartments from this open balcony. It's okay for southern part of Russia, but it's not okay for southern part of Siberia, because regularly have -30. You see, of course, we have central heating. We have relatively cheap coal to make heating, but of course we have to make thick wall. If we didn't have in 1930s any or synthetic insulation, we have to make brick or concrete blocks like a 50 or better 70 centimeters thick. So we have to avoid somehow these very clean, very strict shapes of the early modernist architecture, like this one, because all these forms, like in Corbusier's villas, like in these buildings of Russian constructions, is designed to look like a thin surface, like even a paper thin wall, but it's impossible in our climate. So it was always controversy between abilities to build and design. So limited resources leads to use of some substitutes or imitation of these ribbon windows, because we have not a concrete frame, but we have thick wall, and we paint the stripes showing this like a imitation of ribbon window. In some cases, we have to use organic insulation. For example, in Narpomfin house, here, yes, they have organic insulation made from chopped ryegrass. It's okay. Green architects in modern Europe very like this organic insulations, but back in 1930s we didn't have any protection of fire or fungus, anything. And in some cases, this turn of style to more, monumental things can be explained, but also by necessity of insulation, of using traditional building techniques like a brick and thick wall, and so like this one. Also about the roofs. To make flat roof as terrace, it's a very nice idea. Even in Russian climate, we have few months to use it as a terrace, as a garden on the roof, a playground, anything. But we have to make very good insulation, not only about the freezing, but also to water inside the pillars, for example, and so on. And actually speaking, nobody knows or knows but didn't make it up to late 50s, a real working flat roof. Each example with flat roof in Russia, except maybe very south, has problems with water leaks during the, So this may be a little more conservative architecture with a thick wall, with some decorations like this one. It's in some cases also a matter of the relations between the limitations of the technologies and intention of architects. And only a short time, maybe from 31 to 35, architects became a little, honest with this idea how to design and how to build. It's very difficult, to manage resources, and not every architect has this ability to speak with the authorities of the city, how to have money, budget, and so on. Not only to design, design it's easy, building is hard.
Yeah. Another question I had was how does the general public look at this heritage today? Do they consider it as their heritage, or do they look at the older architecture as their heritage and not really all this period?
Oh, it's changed much last 10 years, and only recently people like a new generation start to perceive it as a historical important. First post-Soviet years in 1990s, even beginning of 2000s, it was like a opinion as everything from the beginning of Soviet time. It's not good because it's after revolution. It's made from bad materials. It's not true, or it's ideologically driven. So today we have a different ideology and so on. But now we have a huge rise of interest, including some new good-looking restoration. Of course, taking all amount of this heritage, this new restorations, it's only unique examples, but I hope the situation will turn over to much more widely, accept heritage of this time as most valuable. And most of the cities in western part of Russia, older part, the older towns, of course, has much more, old heritage, like, churches, palaces, aristocratic mansions, merchants' houses, and so on. But many of the new cities founded in 20s and 30s and 40s, industrial cities, have nothing except their own first buildings of 20s, 30s, and 40s. So now they perceive it as historical towns, because to feel like in a real historical town, they have to fly 3 hours, to the western part of the country. Or this, in some cases, they already like a third, fourth, or fifth generation of people live there, so they understand it's a part of the already settled urban landscape. But as I say, this turn of perceiving happens only a few years ago, maybe 10 or 12. Only some examples are now protected monuments. Of course, the state of the protected monuments didn't guarantee anything, because, for example, for multi-apartment building, you have to force people somehow to treat their own parts of the building. But in some cases, this heritage preservation documents also helps to perceive that people understand, oh, it's protected monument, maybe it's something interesting. But in some cases, it's worth to explain to people what's its values, what real values, not only for architects, not only for history of the profession, but also for general public, about the social concepts, how people firstly in their life receive their own flats, they receive in the 1920s, how they receive these public facilities like communal kitchens, like these workers' clubs, and so on. It's all new for people, because in 20s, thousands of hundreds moved to city from the countryside. As in their life before, they didn't know anything about everyday life in the city. They didn't know how to use a washing machine in the big laundry, because of course there's no personal washing machines. They didn't know how to use a bathroom in the city, because they lived in the countryside, and so. Okay, yes, I see another question. Was there an influence of Marxism-Leninism philosophies in the realm of Russian industrial or public architecture? Oh, it's a very, of course, complicated question. Of course, there's influence. Of course, there was influence. And Lenin, who died in the beginning of 24, already have some direction to architects to prepare some new master plans of the Moscow, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, or to make some decisions on the policy of architecture. But of course, he died too soon to see any result. But the philosophy concepts, of course, became very important. Firstly, in the idea of housing, idea of communal housing, and the evolution of typology. How new types of the buildings, like communal kitchens or workers' clubs, or different types of the residential settlements or residential buildings emerged. So the social concepts matters much. Any stylistic things were much more, speculation later. But the key role of the architect was very important, like in Germany in Bauhaus, that architects not only can design, let's say, from whole town to coffee cup, like this one, yes, but have to design like social engineering, have to improve or establish new social relations between people or group of people inside the town, inside the building, and so on. So it's raise the value, a social role of architect in the very high position.
Nicholas, I would like a few words, Rohit. Permit me, please, to a few words. You know, very good question about Marxism-Leninism, because, you know, really Marxism-Leninism had very big influence of constructivism, because, you know, for rich people, always construction big, always palaces. This is a simplification. You saw small apartments for workers, small apartments for because nobody had apartments, and that's why they wanted to give more apartments to more people. You know, that's why, of course, Marxism-Leninism, ideology of Marxism-Leninism was the main ideology of this constructivism. Yes, Nikolai, I think. Correct?
Exactly.
You know, my dear friends, Dr. Nikolai, he is a doctor of art science. He's professor. He teaching our Russian architecture, future architectural. And we are happy to hear today him, really. Nicholas, I'm very pity I didn't invite Pune colleges of architecture. In Pune, there are 3 or 4 colleges of architecture. In next lecture, you will give them, okay? Because they called me, why, Dr. Sergey, you didn't tell us about this lecture? We are very interested in it. So if you will agree, you will repeat your lecture, because there are many students, maybe as well, like here, 40, 60, I don't know, maybe 100. They want to